Since my mom got pregnant, different men come to the store every day, and my dad only let my mom entertain. But every time those men come out of the small room with radiant faces, my mother's face will become increasingly pale. Later, my mother's belly became bigger and almost burst, and there was no sign of giving birth. I just found out that the bracelet we sell at home is not a lucky bead, but a pregnancy bead. My family runs an antique shop, and it has been more than 10 years since I was a child. The store is full of all kinds of old things that rich people love to tinker with. My family has sold everything related, but business is still getting worse and worse. When I went to college, business was even worse, and I couldn't even afford my monthly living expenses of 1,000 yuan. But since my mom got pregnant, our business has suddenly taken off. Every day, all kinds of men come into the store and ask to buy my antiques. For example, now a Land Rover is parked in front of a small shop, and a man wearing a Cartier watch walks in. He is dressed in a suit and looks gentle, obviously a rich man. My dad put on a warm smile and quickly stood up to greet him. If you need anything, there are copper coins and silver coins here, which are all old objects from the last century. If you like jade, there are also Huanglong jade, Yuhua stone, and jadeite here. These are all meaningless. The man wearing glasses interrupted my dad with a hint of strange enthusiasm in his eyes. I want your family's lucky beads and a bracelet called Lucky Beads. Two things appeared almost simultaneously, but seemed unrelated. My dad led the guest aside as usual, rummaged through the cabinet in the corner, and boasted while searching. Our family's lucky charm, all the bosses who bought it say it's good. He dug out a black plastic bag from the cabinet and unfolded more than a dozen bracelets. The boss's eyes dimmed instantly, frowning with a suspicious expression. Because this bracelet looks like it's made of plastic, the workmanship is rough, and it's not as exquisite as I imagined. I find it outdated to wear. The only difference is that the beads on this bracelet are bright red and extremely eerie. But the boss still gritted his teeth and asked my dad, I want this. How much is it per piece? 1,000 yuan. A plastic bracelet made of children and be sold for 1,000 yuan each. So expensive, the man was stunned and didn't expect a small bracelet to sell for 1,000, showing hesitation. But my dad quickly persuaded you to come and buy the lucky beads. I'm sure you've heard the rumors about our family's lucky beads. My dad's voice softened, and this lucky bead itself is not surprising. The useful thing is the opening ceremony later. As long as you and my wife go to the back room and light up this bracelet, you can come out comfortably in 10 minutes. The man glanced at my mother, who was resting on the expensive chair in the store. Her thin pajamas outlined her beautiful figure, but her skin was delicate and smooth, and her complexion was exceptionally rosy, like a 30-year-old woman. But there was a bulge on her belly, indicating that she was pregnant. My dad's eyes became hot when he saw the man, and he quickly struck while the iron was hot. There was a boss whose company almost went bankrupt before. He came to my store and bought a string of these lucky beads. However, within a week of returning home, he received $2 million orders in a row and came back to life. He muttered while observing the man's expression. The man was obviously moved by my dad's words, and he held on to the lucky bead tightly without letting go. Let's have one. If it works well, I will come back later. He paid the money readily. You go inside for a while. I'll ask my wife to come and bless you. My dad kindly let the boss go to the room inside, then woke up my mom to go to the bathroom. Shortly after, my mother's crying voice came from the bathroom, and I really didn't want to go to the consecration anymore. This was already the 7th one today, and I couldn't take it anymore. What are you talking about? My dad's angry voice came out, deliberately lowering his voice. If you don't consecrate, I'll still do this business. Don't make fun of others. Hurry up and go out to receive guests. After a while, there was a flushing sound in the bathroom, and my mother walked out from inside and silently walked into the room. My dad stood in the store, lit a cigarette, and looked at my mom. Go away. Why are you joining in the fun? I was about to follow my mom in, but my dad stopped me. He took a deep breath of his cigarette and said that there must be no third person present during the consecration. After about half an hour, my mother came out with the man. Her face was as white as paper, as if her essence and blood had been sucked away, and she could hardly stand. However, the man looked radiant, and in just over 10 minutes, he looked almost 10 years younger. Even the wrinkles that drooped at the corners of his eyes relaxed. Brother, your store's lucky charm is indeed well-deserved. I feel like I'm back in my youth now. My father smiled when he heard this, but the next second he put on a worried expression. However, this consecration ceremony is too damaging to our cha and blood, and my wife may have to rest for several more days. He looked up at the man in a suit, and the man instantly realized something and quickly transferred another 1,000 yuan to us with a wave of his hand. Brother, this is sister-in-law's nutrition fee. If it's not enough, you can tell me again. I have become accustomed to the change in attitude and generosity of these men. My dad heard the sound of money arriving and quickly chatted with him with a happy smile. I sat next to my mother, her expression still filled with fear, and her hands kept stroking her belly. Mom, what's wrong with you? I'm really worried and can't help but ask. But my mom didn't answer me. She just held my hand tightly and kept saying, Zixi, don't touch that lucky bead. My doubts deepened, but looking at my mother's appearance, I still didn't say anything. I just noticed that my mother's skirt was wrinkled, which seemed different from when she first went in. My family's lucky pearl business has only been going on for 2 months, and more than 10 men come in to buy things from us every day, and my dad always let my mom go in and consecrate them alone, without any third party present. Every time after the consecration, my mother's expression becomes extremely weak. Therefore, my father specially found a traditional Chinese medicine for my mother, saying that it can stabilize the fetus as long as the herbs are boiled and poured into the bathtub. It can be effective after sitting in the bath for half an hour. So in the evening I boiled hot water for my mother as usual, and then added boiled Chinese medicine to the hot water, letting my mother soak it to calm the fetus. When she went in, her face was still pale, but when she came out wearing a bathrobe, her mother's face was exceptionally bright and charming. Her skin was rosy, and her skin was delicate, like an 18-year-old girl. I was surprised by the efficacy of this herb, but I was afraid to explore its secrets due to my father's instructions. But as I watched my mother's deteriorating health, I couldn't bear the doubts in my heart anymore, and took advantage of the gap when my mother had just left to sneak into the bathroom. Everything inside was as usual, filled with the fragrance of herbs, and I didn't find anything suspicious. I was about to leave when I found something red under the green water my mom had soaked in. I was startled and quickly reached out to fish it out. At the moment it surfaced, I almost screamed. That red thing turned out to be a dark red piece of meat the size of a human palm. And what's even more terrifying is that the shape of the meat looks like a baby. "How did you come in?" My dad's voice came from the door, and I shivered in fear. My dad walked in with an angry face, the piece of meat from my hand, and slapped me hard, making you look around. "Are you trying to cut off our family's financial path?" There was a fierce light in his eyes, and the wrinkles on his face were squeezed together, making it almost impossible for me to recognize him as my father. I was wrong. My head was instantly beaten and tears streamed down my face. I was just worried about my mom. Seeing that I sincerely repented, my father looked at me in silence for a while before his tone softened. "This is the toxin your mother soaked in Chinese medicine. I'll take it and throw it away. If there's another time, I'll break your legs." I watched helplessly as the piece of meat was taken away by my dad, and my heart was still in shock. But I could only comfort myself that it was just like what my dad said. It was toxins soaked out. After finishing everything, I went back to my room and fell asleep, but was awakened in the middle of the night. The sound of chopping vegetables came from the kitchen, and I immediately became alert and sat up from the bed. It was so late. Could it be a thief? I tiptoed open the door and looked towards the kitchen, only to see my father holding a kitchen knife expressionlessly. Waving a kitchen knife, I realized I wasn't a thief. I breathed a sigh of relief and was about to ask my dad what he was doing in the kitchen, and I was horrified to find out the dark red object chopped up on the cutting board is the piece of meat I fished out from my mother's bathwater. I looked through the crack in the door and watched my dad mince the meat, then put the minced meat on the cutting board into a jar. The jar is transparent, and you can see a lot of dark red substance soaking inside. My father carefully picked up the freshly chopped thing, muttering something in his mouth. "This is the latest fetal meat, and it must not fail." He soaked several strings of plastic beads into the jar as he spoke. I widened my eyes and watched as my father carefully sealed the jar and carried it into the bedroom. It turns out that all the lucky beads at home come from this way. Finally, I know why each plastic bracelet can be so bright red. It turns out that it was grown from my mother's flesh. The bracelet will become more and more bright under the soaking of blood. I could no longer contain my impulse and quietly pushed open the door and walked towards my parents' room. My dad didn't even close the bedroom door, and I leaned my face against the crack and saw the scene inside. There is a dark red light in my mother's bedroom, and several idols are placed inside. My mother sat in the middle of the statue, sitting cross-legged with expressionless eyes closed, hands clasped together, and her pale face looked more like a dummy than the statue. Dad carefully placed the glass jar filled with minced meat in front of my mom, and then lit 3 incense sticks on the side with a lighter. Then he held up the incense and knelt down to my mother with a thud. Dong dong, my dad's kowtowing sound. can be heard clearly in the quiet night. His movements were very mechanical, hitting the wooden board on the ground with force, as if he had died there. My heart trembled, and the hand holding the door couldn't help but tremble. My dad kowtowed to the ground countless times, as if possessed, and blood flowed down from the corner of his eye, which was black under the dim red light. After an unknown amount of time, my mother finally slowly opened her eyes, wiped the blood off his head with her hand, and then he walked down from the altar in the middle, with a much softer expression on his face. That expression is no longer like a statue, but has become more gentle, like a normal person. "Wife, you're back." My dad hugged my mom excitedly and kissed him hard. My mom laughed and hugged him. My dad became even more excited and pressed her down on the bed behind him. "Wife, you are so beautiful." His eyes were filled with fanatical obsession, and he kept kissing my mom. But I didn't notice any changes in my mom. She still looks exactly the same as during the day. Watching the two of them go crazy, not at all like the parents I know. My anxiety and eeriness became even stronger. Our family business can no longer be done. Just as I was thinking, the hand holding the door trembled uncontrollably, and the old door made a sound. The movement inside stopped, and I looked up and saw the pale faces looking at me in unison. Seeing something, my father stood up from the bed and walked towards me. His expression became extremely strange, with red light in his eyes, appearing extremely evil under the red light. "Dad, what are you doing so late at night?" I came out to use the restroom and quickly pretended to be sleepy about to walk towards the restroom. Upon hearing this, my father's abnormal expression finally calmed down and returned to his normal appearance. "Haven't I always told you not to ask what you shouldn't ask? Go back to rest after using the restroom." I responded with a sound, went to the bathroom, flushed my dress, walked back to my room, closed the door, and heard my father and mother talking sparsely. After a while, they seemed to realize that the door was not closed tightly, and with a bang, they closed the door again. I also heard the sound of the door being locked. My cold sweat had already soaked my back, and a cold feeling came from my back, as if hundreds of pairs of cold fingers were moving on my back. I thought of my mother's belly. She was only 2 months pregnant. How could her belly look so big? I remembered my mother's wrinkled skirt again. Since she got pregnant, she has been wearing cooler and cooler clothes, and her complexion has become better and better. There is always an inadvertent charm in the corners of her eyes. No boss who comes to the store will refuse to have a private ceremony with them. Perhaps there is a secret hidden in that ceremony that I want to know. The next day, we started work as usual. My mother changed into a cooler nightgown, and the red inside was faintly visible. She waved the fan in her hand with fine beads of sweat on her forehead, and the blush on her face made my mother's face enchanting. Several customers came to the store one after another, and they also came because of the reputation. When everyone heard the price of the bracelet, they thought it was too expensive. But after my dad pointed to my mom, none of them refused and bought the lucky beads from that day's family. My mother also smiled and led the guests to the small room behind to bless them. My dad went out to buy cigarettes in the middle, leaving me in the store to watch my mom. Just as my mother and the fifth man were consecrating, My mother's painful screams came from the small room. "Mom, what's wrong with you?" My heart was suddenly pulled, and I ran into the room regardless of my dad's instructions. In an instant I was stunned. The man inside was only wearing underwear, looking at me anxiously and shouting. I didn't do anything. She suddenly became like this, and he hurriedly put on his pants while speaking, without even fastening his belt, and running away. My mother's translucent white nightgown has been stained red with blood, and her lower body seems to be soaked in blood, which is almost black and shiny, and the color is like a lucky bead. My mother held his stomach with a painful expression on her face. "Mom, hold on, I'll take you to the hospital." I quickly rushed up and supported my mom, using all my strength to carry her on my back. "No, I can't go to the hospital." When my mom heard the word hospital, she became even more frightened and grabbed my arm tightly, otherwise she would be found. "What did you find? Is his life more important?" I was anxious and angry, but the next second, my mom passed out. When I rushed out of the house, my dad hadn't come back yet. I put my mom on the tricycle at home and took her to the county hospital. "Fortunately, you made it in time. Otherwise, your mother's life would not have been saved." The doctor arranged for my mother to be hospitalized and took me to the consultation room. I hesitated for a moment, but still asked the question in my heart. "Doctor, can the child in my mother's belly still be saved?" The doctor looked hesitant. "It's hard to say. We need to take the X-ray results to make a judgment." Shortly after, a young nurse barged in and placed a test report on the doctor's desk. "Dr. John, please take a look at this report." His expression became very strange, like he was anxious and scared. The doctor picked up the X-ray, and his face turned strange for a moment. He remained silent for a long time and slowly turned his gaze to me. "Little girl, how many months is your mother pregnant?" 2 months, I looked at the doctor in confusion. Aren't doctors more professional than me in this kind of thing? "Have you noticed that your mother's belly is too big? Her belly is as big as a person about to give birth." He shook his head and sighed, his words like a bolt from the blue. "Your mother's baby and her belly cannot be saved because she has 9 fetuses in her belly.